Mark chapter 5, 21 through 43. And when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." And he went with them. And a great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and who had suffered much under many physicians, and had spent all that she had. It was no better, but rather grew worse. For she said, "If I touch even his garment, I will be made well." And immediately the flow of blood dried up, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. And Jesus, perceiving in himself that power had gone from him, immediately turned in the crowd and said, "Who touched my garments?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing around you, and yet you say, 'Who touched me?'" And he looked around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling and fell down before him and told him the whole truth. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, "Do not fear, only believe." And he allowed no one to follow him except Peter and James and John, the brother of James. They came to the house of the ruler of the synagogue, and Jesus saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. And when he had entered, he said to them, "Why are you making a commotion and weeping? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. But he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha kumi," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, arise." And immediately the girl got up and began walking, for she was 12 years of age, and they were immediately overcome with amazement. And he strictly charged them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks, Lizzie. Good morning. Good to see you. My name is Matt. I'm one of the pastors here. Happy Easter to you and your fam if you've brought a family with you. I don't normally wear a suit on at church. I did today because, hey, why not? And I thought I'd pull this old cream-colored thing out until I had somebody come up after the first service and say, "You look like a Southern lawyer." And I thought, yeah. And then somebody in the back who will remain nameless said, "Yeah, you look like Matlock." So, whatever. You just have to endure, but this may be the last time you ever see this. The Gospel of Mark is the oldest written account that we have about the life of Jesus, and so it's an incredibly amazing resource in terms of it's so helpful for us to know who Jesus is. And this passage in particular is really helpful in that it helps us understand what Easter is. And so here's how I want to get into it. Some of you might know in the year 1985, there was a submarine that discovered the wreckage from the Titanic. Titanic, as you know, sank in 1912, and so for over 70 years it had just sat at the bottom of the ocean, and when they came upon it, it's all covered in barnacles, it's all ghostly and kind of haunted scene down there, but they started to pull up some of the, some of the stuff from the wreckage that they could salvage. And I happened to watch this History Channel clip a few years ago featuring one of the guys who was tasked to go through all the stuff. And so the interview was him in his lab. It's kind of a big office, and he's surrounded by all these rusty, kind of rotten artifacts all over him, all around him. Not over him, that'd be weird. But it's just kind of this constant reminder of the tragedy and the loss of it all. And he said on camera, as a result, my office just smells like death all the time. And there was one day he was telling a story about how one day he was rummaging through the stuff and came upon a perfume vial, a little, it was sealed. It was just sitting down there at the bottom of the ocean for 70 years. And he opens it up. And he said suddenly the room was invaded with the smell of flowers and fruit, and he said it was overwhelming. And here's his actual quote from this interview. He said, "Instead of being surrounded by all of these dead things, for those few minutes, the ship was alive again." And he breaks down sobbing in this interview. That is a little glimpse into why literally billions of people, billions, over the centuries, have gathered together to celebrate Easter. Because Easter is this day where we celebrate the fact that the fragrant, beautiful life of Jesus has and is invading a world of death. In our passage this morning, we see this invasion of life as well. I mean, the story begins by introducing us to this guy named Jairus, who has a little 12-year-old daughter who is incredibly sick. Says she's on death's door. Any breath could be her last. And so her dad, having heard rumors about Jesus, oh, he can heal people, he can do some stuff. He goes up to Jesus. Jesus is in the middle of this big crowd of people, and it says that he falls at his feet. He just gets, prostrate before Jesus and begs and pleads with him to do something. And Jesus agrees. And so Jairus gets up, and they and the whole crowd of people start walking towards Jairus' house to go do something. If I can imagine, if I'm Jairus, I'm kind of like trying to hurry Jesus along. Come on. Time is of the essence. We got to go. And then Jesus stops, and he begins this whole conversation with one of the women in the crowd who was also suffering, also having her own problems that she was dealing with. She says that she has this chronic, debilitating bleeding condition. And while Jesus is taking his time and talking with her and ends up healing her, somebody from Jairus' home comes and essentially reports, y'all are too late. She didn't make it. Which, of course, is, every father's worst nightmare. And so I'm sure Jairus is just utterly devastated, just in complete shock. The text doesn't say it, but it's reasonable that he was angry at Jesus for taking so long, angry at this woman for slowing Jesus down with her problems, being so selfish with her problems. He had bigger problems than she did. Why couldn't she see that? It's a tragic story, but it's a human story because it really does reorient us to the fact that we really do live in this world of death. Even though the story is so tragic, it does bring us right into the heart of Easter and what Easter is about. We learn two things that this text shows us about Easter. It shows us the need for Easter, and it shows us the wonder of Easter. So let's look at those one at a time. The need and then the wonder of Easter. First, the need for Easter. It's fascinating. You've got two people in the story. You've got Jairus and you've got this woman with the bleeding condition, and they could not be more different. You find out in verse 22 that Jairus was one of the rulers of the synagogue, which means he was powerful, he was influential, he was wealthy. The story tells us his name. His name is Jairus. We know his name. People knew who he was. He was a big deal. He was like Ron Burgundy. And but the woman, she has no name in the story. We don't know her name. All we know is all we're told is that she has this terrible bleeding condition that's been going on for 12 years. And it says in verse 26 that she has exhausted all of her financial and medical options, so she's completely broke. We know from the rest of the Bible that this culture would have, because of her condition, would have labeled her as ritually unclean, which means she would have been removed from society for 12 years. So you have no community, you have no friends, you have no money, you have no name. They could not be more different, but there is this one thing that unites them together. They are both desperate. They are both desperate for help. Both of them are staring death in the face, and there's nothing that either one of them can do. Reminds me of this of the line from the musical Hamilton, where Aaron Burr sings, "Death doesn't discriminate between the sinners and the saints. It takes and it takes and it takes and it takes and it takes." Death doesn't care if you're a sinner or a saint. Death doesn't care if you're rich or you're poor, you're a man or you're a woman. Death doesn't care if you're the elite in society or if you're at the margins of society. Death is the great equalizer. It comes for us all, and that's what you see in this passage. You know, it's really interesting. I don't know if this is true or not, but it's plausible that before this story, Jairus hated Jesus. Jairus was one of the religious leaders, and the religious leaders of the day were not fans of Jesus. You see that over and over and over again. And so if that's true, what would cause a powerful, wealthy, well-connected, influential man to fall on his face at the feet of somebody he previously despised? The only answer is tragedy. The only answer is suffering. I have been in pastoral ministry for 17 years now, ish. And I've seen people's lives transformed because they have embraced Jesus by faith. And I've seen people reject Jesus and the claims of the Bible for lots of different reasons. But I have noticed an interesting pattern that has emerged that you can kind of see, generally speaking, that there's, predictable trends. One trend is people don't tend to want much to do with Jesus when things are going well in their life. When they're reaching all their goals and they've got money in the bank and they've got food on the table and everybody's happy and everybody's healthy and everyone's kind of energized. Who cares about Jesus? We don't need him. And I have seen that people sometimes start to get curious about who Jesus is when their life really starts to fall apart. When their marriage starts to implode, or they get the really scary medical diagnosis, or they just are going through a season where it just feels like I'm in over my head. I don't even know which direction is up. Because just like Jairus in this story, suffering has the power to bring people to fall at their, at the feet of Jesus, who they previously could care less about. And my guess is that maybe the reason why some of you are here today is you're here because you're like, my life feels like it's spinning out of control, and I don't feel like I have any other options. And if that's you, the good news is Easter's for you. Easter is for people who have run out of options. Easter is for people like Jairus and for people like this woman. That is the need for Easter. The need is we live in a world of death, and it is barbaric, and it is painful, and it is hard. And the reality is death eventually comes for all of us. And when that day comes, there's nothing you can do. AI can't undo it. No medical technology is ever going to fix death. When it comes, you're just at its mercy. So we all need Easter. But let's look secondly at the wonder of Easter. If you pick up the story where I left off, people from Jairus' home came and they told Jairus, it's too late. And people back then know, just like you and I know, that if somebody has died or if someone's passed away, there's nothing else you can do for them. Like they're past the point of no return. Of course, you can plan a funeral, you can do this, that, or the other, but you can't help that person any longer. That's why they say in verse 35, why trouble the teacher any further? What's he going to do? And Jesus overhears this whole conversation, and he says, do not fear, just believe. In other words, trust me. Trust me. Do you trust me? So Jairus and Jesus and some of Jesus' friends, they continue the rest of the way, and they get to the home. They get to Jairus' home. They go through the front door, and everybody inside is weeping, wailing loudly. I mean, understandable. Something horrific has just occurred in that home. And it says what verse is it? It says in verse 39 that when Jesus walks in, he says, why all this commotion? She's not dead, she's just sleeping. And it says that they laugh at him. And I don't think this was like belly laughing on the floor because everybody's still weeping. I just think it's just like scoffing him, because that in their ears is the most ridiculous thing that they could have heard. What are you talking about? She's not dead, she's just sleeping. But, he's undeterred from all of the mockery, and he goes into her room. It is this room of death. And in verse 41, it says that he goes to her bedside, and he takes her by the hand, so gentle, and he says, I don't know how to pronounce it, Talitha Kumi or Talitha Kumi, something like that, which is an Aramaic phrase. Talitha or Talitha is an Aramaic word. It's a pet name that a parent would give their child. It's like sweetie or honey. And Kumi, it just means, wake up. It's kind of this invitation to wake up. Jesus is treating her, relating to her like a parent would relate to their child in the morning when they're trying to wake them up to get ready for school. He goes to this little girl and takes her by the hand and says, sweetie, it's time to wake up. And he pulls her out of death back into life. I mean, it's astounding. It's a display of Jesus' power, yes, but it's also a display of his radical grace. Radical grace. And here's what I mean by that. The Bible has a pretty interesting hot take on death. The Bible's understanding is that death is not natural. Death is not just a part of the circle of life, and so let's sing like Simba did. Death is not a bridge to just a better place. Death is the tragic results of our disobedience and our rebellion against God. I mean, the Bible says, Romans 6, the wages of sin. What do you get? What are my wages of sinning, rebelling? It's death. The wages of sin is death. Think about it like this. If I had a fire going in our fireplace, in our living room, and we're enjoying the fire, and my two lovely children turn around, come around the corner, and they're holding a full bottle of lighter fluid. And they say, hey, Dad, hey, Mom, can we throw this bottle of lighter fluid onto the fire? We would say, no, you may not do that. Please do not do that. And if they decide to disobey, if they say, well, we're going to do what we want to do, and they do it, it's not that they're just like breaking some rule, breaking some arbitrary rule that, Mom and Dad came up with just to spoil your fun. There would be explosive, horrific, terrible consequences. When God in the beginning looked at his children and he said, I want you to love me with everything that you have. I want to be the center of your life. I want you to love me more than money. I want you to love me more than sex. I want you to love me more than popularity, more than success, more than your family. And we said, hard pass, not interested. And we disobeyed. And it wasn't just us breaking some kind of arbitrary rule that because, God felt insecure. It was woven into the fabric of how reality is structured. So when we disobeyed, it was like this explosion went off. And there were terrible, horrific consequences. But we see in this story how God responds to those who have been rebellious, to the disobedient, to the effects of sin and death in the world. Because what we see later in this story, the Gospel of Mark, shortly after this story, Jesus goes into another room of death, but it's not a little girl's bedroom. He goes into a tomb. He voluntarily plunges himself into death, into the consequences of our rebellion, not his. And in so doing, he takes all of the cosmic and the ultimate punishment of everything that our rebellion deserved in and of himself. He pays the penalty. He pays the debt, as it were. And 3 days later, God miraculously raises him from the dead, not symbolically, not metaphorically, but really actually as if to say, okay, the consequences of rebellion have been paid for. Jesus has dealt with death. Death dies because of the life and the death and the resurrection of Jesus. Now, I'm sure some of you hear this, and anytime you hear somebody like me stand up and talk about the resurrection of Jesus, it can sound like that is so preposterous. That is so, how do you expect me to believe people actually rise from the dead? This is like, are y'all that primitive and stupid around here? I don't know if there are any more in the back, but maybe there are. There should be some pamphlets in the back called "Did Jesus Really Rise from the Dead?" And if that's you, if that's you struggling with, it's so hard for me to believe something like that. I would really encourage you to grab that and to pick it up and read it. If we're out of copies, just email the office and we'll just email you a PDF of it or something. But this was written in the attempt to try to answer the questions and respond to the questions that people have when they hear Christians talk about the resurrection. How can we know that to be true? Aren't there other explanations for this? Wasn't it all kind of symbolic anyway? All that kind of stuff. But it shows you that the heart of Easter, what Easter is about the physical, actual resurrection of Jesus. It's not about springtime and the arrival of allergies. It's not about bunnies and eggs. Bunnies don't lay eggs. I said that in one service, and I had a parent come up and say, my child is very confused now and need you to explain what you meant. And I said, well, there's one bunny that maybe is a little special and has that capacity, but as far as I know, every other bunny doesn't lay eggs. That's not what Easter is about. It's not about candy. It's not about little green grass that gets all over your living room. It's about the resurrection of Jesus. It's this unbelievable truth claim and bedrock reality that if Jesus has you by the hand, death itself will be nothing but sleep. This is why Jesus says in John chapter 11, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, even though he die, yet shall he live. Even though you die, even though you deserve ultimate, eternal death, but my grace is such, my love for you is such, I've died in your place and I'll pull you out of it. The aroma of life invading the world. This is the wonder of Easter, that Jesus transforms death into sleep. A few years ago, Lady Gaga and Bruno Mars came out with a smash hit banger of a song called Die With a Smile. I want to read you some of the lyrics of this. It says, I just woke up from a dream where you and I had to say goodbye. And I don't know what it all means, but since I survived, I realized if the world was ending, I'd want to be next to you. And the story of the song is that he has a dream, right? He has this horrible nightmare where he loses the love of his life. And I'm sure you've had dreams like that too. I have. That just feels so real and so vivid, and it's awful. But he says, he wakes up, and then he realizes it was just a dream. And the comfort of realizing everything horrible that I just experienced, it all became untrue. That's what caused him to, feel comforted and consoled and write that amazing song about it. It wasn't because somebody came along and actually tried to cheer him up because he actually lost the love of his life. I mean, that would be nice, but imagine waking up and it was true. You did lose everything. And then somebody comes and says, well, I hate that you lost your loved one. Let me try to set you up with one of my friends, and we'll kind of make up for it. That would be a consolation for what he lost. But because it was a dream and he wakes up, he doesn't just get a consolation for what he lost. He gets the restoration of what he lost. It felt like they were gone, and yet there they are. When Jesus says, if I have you by the hand, death itself will be nothing but sleep. He is not saying and not promising, well, you're going to die and you're going to lose all your loved ones, you're going to lose everything in this life, and you're going to go through this really hard experience, but one day I'm going to set you up with this nicer place in the clouds, and it's going to be so great, it's going to comfort you for the life that you lost. That would be a consolation. But Jesus says, no, I'm not promising you a consolation of what you've lost. I'm going to give you the restoration of what you've lost. That's resurrection. I'm going to make every horrible thing that you've experienced in this life feel like it was a bad dream. And you are going to wake up to a life of wonder beyond anything that you've ever experienced or can imagine. This is why the early Christians in the first century, they were the first people to refer to a graveyard as a cemetery I mean, we just use those terms interchangeably, cemetery, graveyard. It was not always the case. Christians came up with referring to a graveyard as a cemetery. The reason why is the word cemetery means dormitory, means sleeping place. They looked out at graves and they said, these people are basically just sleeping because Jesus has done something about death. One day, someday, we don't know when, Jesus is going to come to those who are his by faith, and he's going to take them by the hand and say, sweetie, it's time to wake up, and they will raise to resurrected life. This is why the great English, 17th century English poet George Herbert said that death used to be an executioner, but the gospel has made him just a gardener. Used to be an executioner, but now you're just a gardener. So here's the question for you, final question. What do you do when you experience real loss? Real loss, the loss of a job, the loss of a friend, the loss of your youth, the loss of your health, the loss of something that means something to you that you will never get back. What do you do in those moments? If you do not believe in the resurrection of Jesus, your only two options are despair or denial. Despair is to say, well, that's just the way life is. I am just going to try to accept and surrender to the fact that the world is just kind of a brutal place. Life is a joke and then you die, or some version of that. You live and then you die and then that's it. That's despair. You know, the kids used to say, hashtag YOLO. You only live once. That's it. You only get one ride on this merry-go-round, so you better enjoy it. It's despair. The other option is denial. It's just say, I don't want to think about hard things, suffering, dying, pain. I'm going to just kind of plug my ears and sing my song, and I'm going to just stuff away everything so that I don't have to think about that stuff. I'll settle for really simplistic answers. And after all, there's always Netflix, there's always bourbon, there's always, Amazon. I can get through this life. La, 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 la. This is the option that Fiyero chose in the musical Wicked, when he's singing, dancing through life, skimming the surface, gliding where turf is smooth. Life's more painless for the brainless. Why think too hard when it's so soothing? That's the idea. Like, why think about this stuff? Let's just skim along the surface of life superficially and just pretend all that hard stuff isn't there. If you don't believe in the resurrection, those are your only options. But if you believe in the resurrection, you know what that gives you? Defiant hope in the midst of ultimate and utter loss. Even though you know I'm going to die and I'm going to lose everything, but because of Jesus and what he has done, yet I shall live. The fragrant aroma of life has and is and will invade this world of death. I mean, look at how I put this in your bulletin. Look at how the old English poet John Donne talks about death. It's incredible. I mean, this is the most punk rock thing ever written. He says, death, in other words, he's just addressing death in the face. Death, be not proud, though some have called thee mighty and dreadful, for thou art not so. For those whom thou thinkest thou dost overthrow, die not. Translation, for those who you think you overthrow, don't die. Poor death. Aw, poor little death. Nor yet canst thou kill me. Isn't that amazing? Looking death in the face, you can't kill me. That is defiant hope because of the wonder of the resurrection. Last thought, and then I'm done. I was reading a book recently, and it was talking about two different tombstones. I thought this was interesting. The first tombstone was referring to the tombstone of Mel Blanc. Some of you might know that name. He was the old voice actor for those thousands of old school Looney Tunes cartoons, Bugs Bunny and Elmer Fudd, the gang. And what he had put on his tombstone was the catchphrase that he said at the end of almost all of those cartoons. That's all, folks. Which is, cute. But it also tells you how he thought about life. That's just it. I live, and then I died, and then that's all, folks. nothing more to see here. No future, no hope, no expectations, no confidence that there's anything beyond this. The second tombstone was of the author of the book. It was his friend's grandmother, who was buried in a church cemetery under a big oak tree somewhere in rural Louisiana. And her family put on her tombstone what she had requested, which was just one word: waiting. Waiting. If Jesus has you by the hand, death itself will be nothing but sleep. Amen. Let me pray. Father, would you give us the eyes to see the wonder and the beauty of the gospel of the resurrection, that we might be so transformed and so in awe of it that even as we experience hard things in this life, it would feel like we know we're just preparing to wake up from a bad dream. Not because it isn't real, but because the future is so real, all of it will feel just like a dream. Father, thank you for the hope of the resurrection, that not just your Son rose to new life, but so will all who trust in him. Father, give us a defiant hope even now as we experience the brutality of life and walk through a world of death. Would you help us to have the confidence that John Donne had, to look death in the face and talk back to it, not because we are strong, but because Jesus is. And we pray all this in his mighty name. Amen.